Hello everybody, this is Joanne speaking here and welcome to this video. Today, for the first time on my YouTube channel, I'm explaining my thoughts on my very first Godzilla movie. I normally do dinosaur / Jurassic Park related content, but today I want to do something different. On the evening of December the 2nd, 2023, I went and saw Godzilla Minus One in theaters. Just in case you guys don't remember me saying this before, I saw all the old classic Godzilla films in 2021, so I didn't see this movie without any context of any of the other movies, both in the past or in the modern times. I'm not gonna blabber on about how I was introduced to Godzilla in the first place in this video because I want to save that for later on down the line for when I talk about my experience with watching the older movies. Please bear with me on this video because like I said before, this is the first time I'm ever doing a review video on a Godzilla movie. Being able to watch this movie in theaters was a huge relief for me because before it came out, I was very concerned that it would be released too far away from a town I currently live in. I'm saying this because back in 2016, Shin Godzilla was released in the United States, but that movie ended up playing 3 hours away from me, which really sucked, and I wasn't able to see this movie until the end of 2021. And as for my thoughts on Godzilla Minus One, Jiminy Crickets, this was a dark film, I tell you. And seeing Godzilla in a more traditional way again was refreshing. Not only we have a more classic Godzilla who stomped his way back to theaters, we also have a retelling of the original 1954 film, but with some differences. The rewatch trilogy has been weird, yet interesting. We had Godzilla as a zombie-like mutant that changes into multiple forms, an enormous grandpa plant, and an apocalyptic entity that also changes into multiple forms. As always, I will talk about the things I like. In my opinion, there's a lot to like about this film. I don't have any dislikes because I can't think of any, although I do have one nitpick, but I'll get into it later. We can't talk about this movie without talking about the big G himself, though. The full look on Godzilla's design has already been spoiled before the movie came out, I'm not going to deny that, and it does look similar to the design from Godzilla the Ride, but the big G himself does look really cool in this film. He reminds me of the Heisei Godzilla, but with more bulk and a spikier appearance. Godzilla looks kinda gnarly, but not too gnarly like Shin Godzilla or Godzilla Ultima. Oh, and he was really out for blood in this film. Very aggressive and coming after humans on purpose. I mean, sure, Godzilla causing destruction was done before, and the 54 Godzilla, or Shodai Goji, laid waste to Tokyo after getting hit by a nuke. However, he's more aggressive compared to Shodai Goji. It reminds me of the GMK Godzilla, and after finding out that the director of Minus One is fond of the GMK movie, it makes more sense now. Although Godzilla in this movie wasn't truly evil, unlike the GMK Godzilla, he was just filled with so much anger and vengeance. Let's not forget that Godzilla regenerates his wounds on screen like the MonsterVerse King Ghidorah. Can we also talk about his atomic breath in this movie? His atomic breath scares me, and for a good reason. We've seen Godzilla annihilate an entire city or town with his atomic breath before, but for this one, not only his dorsal spines extend out of his back as he charges up, but with just one blast of his atomic breath, it all blows up like a nuclear explosion, completely taking out Tokyo. Considering Godzilla represents the consequences of nuclear weapons, seeing his atomic breath cause this much destruction really fits well. I get a feeling of dread every time I see Godzilla's dorsal spine start glowing. Although, if this Godzilla were to face another monster in combat and chose to fire his atomic breath, it could be a potential problem for him because charging it up is really slow, and whenever Godzilla uses it, it hurts, and he would need some time to heal. Last but not least, I want to talk about his roar. While I do like how they used the 54 sounds, holy crap, it was really loud. When I saw this movie in theaters, Godzilla's roar blasted through the speakers super hard. It was so loud I thought the entire theater was going to come crashing down on me and everyone else who was watching this film. I don't know how my ears weren't bleeding after those numerous times Godzilla roared, but mercy me, I'm glad I can still hear. But overall, I'm pretty impressed with this film's version of Godzilla. He's really scary, and the movie managed to not only give him a few new characteristics, but also didn't overdo it to the point where he didn't stray too far from being a more traditional Godzilla. Another thing I enjoy this movie, the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack in this movie. It's really beautiful, really epic at times, and considering the nature of this film, there's also a sense of dread in the music. When you watch a movie about Godzilla, you're gonna expect some epic music. Another thing I like about the soundtrack are the callbacks. It's not just the classic Godzilla theme, but also a few references to the other tracks from the movies in the past. I briefly heard the theme from Mothra vs. Godzilla from 1964, and also the theme from the old King Kong vs. Godzilla movie in a scene where the ships sail beside Godzilla. As soon as I heard those tracks during the film, I was just all like, wait a minute. If I have to pick some of my favorite tracks, it would be Resolution and Prey. Another thing I enjoyed about Godzilla Minus One is the story. I also like how the movie is not just a complete remake of the 54 film, but it also introduces a new story. Instead of 1954, it's in the late 40s. Just when you think Japan went through enough after World War II, Godzilla has appeared, making things worse than it already is. We also get to see a story about a kamikaze pilot who suffers from PTSD and survivor's guilt after an encounter with Godzilla. And because Japan is limited on stuff they have due to the war, there was no spectacular weapon to use against Godzilla. It's not like they have a black hole machine or the oxygen destroyer or anything like that, so they had to go with what they have in order to defeat Godzilla. Or so they thought they defeated him. This is one heck of a dark story, and considering the nature of Godzilla, it is expected to be dark, but dang, I still got goosebumps. I haven't seen a Godzilla movie this dark since the one from 54. True, there are some other movies that have dark elements and depressing moments, but not on the same level as the very first Godzilla movie. I also like how this movie showed Godzilla getting hit by a nuke for the first time. Godzilla getting hit by a nuke usually happens off screen in the other films, but this movie decided to show it happening on screen. Even though it was brief and it just shows a close-up shot of part of Godzilla's face during this whole thing, it's nice to see this movie show a scene like that happening for the first time. Last but not least, I like the additional attention to details. As I mentioned before, Godzilla causing destruction is something we've seen before. The old classic movies showed a lot of building destruction. However, what we didn't get to see often in the older films by Toho were humans getting killed by Godzilla. The movies usually focus on showing shots of buildings, vehicles, trains, etc. getting destroyed, and a lot of deaths being off-screen. But this movie went as far as to show more humans falling victim to the destruction, which includes getting stepped on by Godzilla's foot, getting flung in the air, getting crushed by falling debris, all that jazz. Jiminy crickets, dude! And of course, can't forget about my favorite scenes from the movie. My first favorite scene was the intro to this movie. I like the intro because it's pretty reminiscent to the Heisei film Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, where we got to see Godzilla in his Godzillasaurus form. Although compared to the original design of Godzillasaurus, this one is pretty spooky looking. It feels a little weird to see a Godzillasaurus design looking like that, but it is what it is. And whether it was intended or not, this scene gave me some Jurassic Park vibes a few times. My other favorite scene from the movie would be when Koichi took an airplane and flew over to Godzilla, who's in an open field, to lure him into a trap that's been set up. The way the scene was shot and hearing the soundtrack called Resolution was really fun for me to watch. Now, on to the only nitpick with this movie, and I was made aware that I'm not the only one who noticed it. When I was talking to Tristan about the movie sometime after I got home, he brought this up, and I'm glad I wasn't alone. What's the nitpick? It would be the way Godzilla was walking while he was destroying Tokyo. I'm talking about when he takes a step and stops, takes a step and stops. It's a little bit weird to see Godzilla walk like that, since most of the time he walks normally. I'm not sure why he walks like that. Maybe he's in a lot of pain like Shin Godzilla was, but oh well. It's just a small nitpick, nothing too awful or major. To conclude my overall thoughts, this is phenomenal. Out of what came out in the Reiwa era, this is the best Godzilla movie so far. Heck, this movie became so successful it extended its stay here in the United States for other people to see. And in my opinion, this is a lot better than Shin Godzilla. Heck, I was told that this movie is what Shin Godzilla should have been, and I couldn't agree more. While I enjoyed Shin Godzilla, it does get a bit overloaded with political talk going on. While the Polygon trilogy had a lot of guts to try out new things, the execution/story was an underwhelming experience for me, and the main human character himself was a brat and just plain unlikable. While I enjoyed seeing their point, some designs are questionable, and all the science talk can get mind-numbing at times. Godzilla Minus One is the movie of the Reiwa era where I could finally take a breather and enjoy Godzilla being more normal, or traditional, compared to the other stuff that came out in Japan. It took 6 years since Shin Godzilla for this movie to come out, and it was definitely worth it in the end. Before I give this movie the final sick of claw rating, I have a couple more things to say. I do wonder if a sequel is possible, and I'm saying this because, well, spoiler alert, the ending shows Koichi and Akiko reuniting with Noriko after Noriko survives Godzilla's attack. But while no one notices, Noriko is left with a strange mark on her neck. Apparently, according to my friend Zaheer, this goes beyond radiation sickness, and Noriko is infected with Godzilla cells. Yep, that is disturbing. Oh, and spoiler alert again, before the credits rolled, the movie ends on a cliffhanger where a piece of Godzilla's flesh starts regenerating, indicating that Godzilla will be back. I'm not gonna lie, that was a straight up callback to the ending to GMK right there. Considering the mark on Noriko's neck and Godzilla's flesh regenerating in the ocean, I do wonder about a potential sequel that could happen in the future because I definitely want to see what would go down with what the movie showed at the end. As I'm recording this, it's up in the air so far. Either this movie will just be a standalone movie with a cliffhanger ending like with GMK and Shin Godzilla, or it's going to have a direct sequel like Tokyo SOS, where the story shows what happens next. This movie has great characters, a story with a darker tone, awe-inspiring music, and a powerful yet terrifying take on the star himself. Godzilla Minus One shall be given a 9.8 out of 10 sickle claws. And there you have it. I had a good time with this one, and it was nice to do something different every once in a while. In the future or so, I will probably do some videos where I talk about the other Godzilla movies, but it will be a huge project. Although I'm sure there's ways to make all that work. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in another video.